I am thrilled to be joined now by Mellody Hobson. Mellody is co-CEO of Ariel Investments. You're also the president of Ariel Investments. She sits on the boards of some of the world's most prominent companies and is also a gifted financial literacy explainer. So, Mellody, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
I'm thrilled to join you, really, especially right now. People need information.
They really do. I'm inundated with questions from viewers all the time asking about the stimulus, asking what's coming. And I thought we'd start with those stimulus checks. People are waiting for them to arrive, but the question I get more regularly than any other is when it shows up, where should they budget it? Should they prioritize saving? Should they prioritize paying down bills? What's your advice?
So the first thing I would say is most people need to prioritize just food and shelter. So that's generally what I'm hearing is people need it to eat or to keep a roof over their head right now. And after that, everything else becomes pretty much a luxury. Now that's the rank and file average person. If you have food and shelter covered and you're looking beyond that, then that's a different story. But that is not, generally most people are in dire straits waiting for those checks and need it for just the basics. After the basics, I would say that honestly, I would go first to, can you lend a hand to someone else? I mean, I think this is one of those times where humanity really needs to step up and has. And that's probably one of the silver linings that has come out of this pandemic, which has been such a crisis and bad situation. And then the other thing I would think beyond that is thinking about if you have the ability to save, putting that money away to make sure you continue to have emergency money that is there. And let's say you've got 6 months of living expenses already covered, then beyond that, it would be thinking about investing. So first, and the most immediate needs, can you help someone? Then the emergency fund, then I would be thinking about saving and investing.
And for the emergency fund, roughly 6 months is what smart.
I've always said 3 to 6 months of living expenses. So I'm assuming that if you had 3, maybe you pile on a little bit more, just not knowing, what the situation is. But that again, that is a luxurious state to be in this country at this point. A lot of people are well beyond that situation and are really just needing money in the pocket right now to pay for bills or medicine, food, shelter, as I've already suggested. If you are finding yourselves where you're prioritizing what bills to pay,
Yeah.
that becomes a different conversation. And I always tell people, start first and foremost, you need a phone. Like literally, it's one of those. So the cell phone bill becomes really, really important. It becomes your connection to the internet, to people, to job opportunities, all sorts of things. You need a phone is really important.
I get a lot of questions from students asking about student loans. Should they be paying down student loans right now if they have extra
Well,
money?
you can write for hardship deferrals right now. The government is taking those requests in, and so you can be put in a deferral situation. And if you're in a hardship, I would absolutely do it. I would also not be above calling my bank on something like this and saying, I've lost my job or I wait tables and the restaurant is closed or whatever it might be, and I cannot pay my student loan right now. Tell them you have a problem. Tell them in advance.
That's great advice. I think people don't think to do that.
Also remember the banks have a lot of visibility to their customers. They know if you had direct deposits coming in and you were always a good payer. They know all of those things. And so they can look at that history and give you forbearance in those situations. You've got to just get in front of it and ask for it. And yeah, you might be on hold forever, but be dogged about this.
Advocate for yourself. That's really smart. Very specific question, but people are asking, will I have to pay back the stimulus check I receive?
No. So it's a one-time. You won't be expected to pay it back.
And there's no taxes on it either. Not on the stimulus, not on unemployment, right?
No taxes. Yeah. It's a one-time, literally stimulus to get people money in the hands of individuals for basics. No taxes, not expected to be repaid.
Okay, shifting a little bit to folks who have some savings. I'm getting this question a lot, which is this a good time to buy a house or a condo?
Yes.
Yes.
If you could buy, yes. Because first of all, I would imagine people will be super negotiable.
Mm.
If there were, now the question is, can you go and see it? A lot of realtors have actually, they're not showing homes in this environment. And the only way you can see them is virtually. But if a house is on the market, I would imagine you could come in at a low number and maybe pick up a real value if you're in the position to do something like that. I think what people will be very, very afraid that they're going to be left holding inventory or trying to sell a house for a very long time after this. So if you've got that ability, yes.
That's interesting. Other folks are asking what happened.
One more thing.
Yeah.
Interest rates are super low. I mean, you can get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage in the 3% range. That's very, very cheap money.
That's interesting. It might take a while to find movers to move you in.
That's true.
What happens to folks if they can't pay rent?
So there are a few options. So I would be looking in your city and state. Some governors, some mayors have put in orders right now that say you can't foreclose or you can't evict. So check and see if that's in your community. And they put those in for, interestingly, up to 12 months. Some I've seen for 18 months. That's just remarkable. One of the things that we'll do on the one hand that should allow our housing prices not to tumble like we saw during the financial crisis, because part of what happened was you get a foreclosed home on your block, it devalues all the houses on your block. So that's helpful from that perspective. The other part is people won't necessarily be on the street. So first, check that. Second, again, I get in front of all this. I'm not saying everyone will be great, but can you call your landlord if you're a renter and say, I've got this huge problem. Is there any way that, we can negotiate either a lower number or I'm going to have to wait until I have income? What I'm worried about is people are giving renters some forbearance, but they're piling up a bill that they'll ultimately owe. And so how they're going to get on the other side of that, I'm very, very worried about. I think landlords may have to consider cutting some kind of deal because they'll be in a situation where they're owed the money and then the person leaves anyway. And so you want to ask yourself again, if you had a really good renter, do you want to have them go? So a lot of this is just going to be negotiations and hopefully getting to people to understand what's in their best interest as well, especially if you've been a good tenant.
Okay, again, it's advocate for yourself, have the conversation. Again, this is for folks who have some money and some savings. If they're invested now and they're invested, say, in mutual funds or 401ks, should they be thinking about taking their money out and being more liquid? Or is this actually a good time to invest in the stock market?
So I'm a long-term investor. My firm has a turtle as a logo at Ariel Investments. And we say slow and steady wins the race as a nod to the Aesop fable of the tortoise and the hare. The tortoise won in the end. I think it's very, very important for retirement money to do what it is supposed to do, which is be there when you retire. For most people, that is long-term money, unless retirement is upon you or you're retired right now. So for most people, I would not want you to touch that retirement money. The worst thing you could possibly do is sell into a down market like this. The only thing you'll be doing is locking in losses, and that is a permanent loss of capital. The best thing you can do if you're in a retirement plan is keep letting it go. If you can keep actually contributing to it, that's great. Because what you're doing is, a few months ago, you were buying when the stock market was high. Now you're buying when it's low. And over the long term, you average a better price. Some people, however, are going to need to lean on that retirement money to live. I would prefer you to take a loan over an early withdrawal. Borrow the money from yourself so that you can ultimately pay it back, as opposed to taking the early withdrawal, which ultimately has taxes and penalties tied to it. That would be my goal. And as much as possible, make that retirement money sacred. But I know these are unprecedented and hard times. And so I know people may have to lean on that retirement money. If you have the ability to invest, I'd be nibbling. Don't just go pile in. I'd be doing a little bit at a time. That's what we're actually doing at Ariel, buying into these down days and with a mind towards the long term. The one thing I know, 3 to 5 years from now, this will be a distant memory. This will end. And when it ends, we will start to see some normalization, and that will prove to be very profitable for businesses that have been washed out during this period.
So, can I just ask you on that front, are ETFs still a good bet right now, electronically traded funds, for folks who don't want to cherry pick investments?
ETFs and mutual funds are great long-term investments.
Okay. Uh, Here's a question that's, I think, resonates. I'm scared about the future, someone writes. Will there be jobs, or what do you see for business and hiring in the next few months?
Okay, so this is the way I would think about it. And I think so much of life is about expectations. It's going to feel like Groundhog Day for the next few weeks. We're going to wake up on Thursdays and get these unemployment numbers, and it's going to hurt. It's going to be bad. Every time you see it, don't panic. Just know the country, my friend Zanny Beto said this, who's the head of The Economist, we've put the global economy in a medically induced coma. We've done that. And we've stopped all non-essential businesses from operating, more or less. And so as a result of that, it will be bad before it can recover. So this short term is going to be very, very painful. But do not anchor to now. Over the long term, it will work itself out. And you can just look at 100 years of history to look at that. We're in 2020. 1920 was the roaring 20s. We went into the Great Depression. Our country recovered from that. We went into World War II. The world recovered from that. We went into the Vietnam War. We went into the Cuban Missile Crisis. We went into the oil embargo. We had the crash of '87 in my lifetime. We've had the Twin Towers being hit with 9/11. Stock market was closed for 6 days. Interestingly, the beginning of World War I, stock market was closed for 4 months.
I didn't know
All
that.
of this gives you perspective. And if you look back at all those periods, 12, 18, 24 months later, you started to see a recovery. Even the global financial crisis that we just had in 2008 and 2009, the jobs that were lost during that period, stock market went down 52%. It's up over 400% since then, in a decade. So all of this is to just say we have to take a long-term view. It's going to be bad before it improves. The short term won't feel great. It won't seem great. It won't be great, notwithstanding actual lives that are lost. But when we start to come out of this, which we will, things will start to recover. You'll start to see the job numbers start to move back the other way. Ben Bernanke, who was the former chairman of the Fed, wrote his PhD on the Great Depression. And he talks about that this is not a depression. It's more like a natural disaster, but a natural disaster that has hit the whole world at once. Think of it as if a snowstorm hit California. Everything would stop. That's exactly what has happened. Then we've got to go through our thaw and get back to normal.
Last question for now. I love your optimism. In light of what you're describing, that the next few months will be challenging, maybe a year, how should people think about taking care of themselves and planning in the face of so much uncertainty?
So first of all, when it comes to your finances, that's my thing about advocating. The worst thing you could do is like set those bills, have those bills just pile up and say, I don't want to open it. I don't want to open it. People do that. And ultimately that only builds the anxiety that they have. Open it and then decide what is the best next step. It may be prioritizing the little you have amongst them. It may be calling and negotiating with your credit card company or your bank or your mortgage company or your landlord, as I've already suggested. But just knowing where you are. It may be you making a decision you've got to double up with your sister or a family member, etc. These are the hard choices that I know people will have to make. Hopefully they will be temporary. They won't be long-term choices. So that's one thing that I think is very important. I think that would just, if you can confront the problem and not wonder how bad it is, I think that takes some pain and anguish out of our mental state. Because I do believe worrying about money is mentally debilitating. It takes years off of our lives. it affects our health. So, this is not a time to be dismissive of real problems that people have. The other thing that I would say is I would seek help. There are sources out there from, calling your credit bureau, seeking help with, if you have to call friends and family, this is the time not to stand on pride and to tell people if you need help. You don't know when you can pay them back. I just think this is, and I think that there are a lot of good people out there that if they could, they would share. So I know some of us never felt that we'd be in this position. I've been in that position when I was younger, and I know what it's like. But I'm saying this is an unprecedented time, and it calls for unprecedented stances.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, just keeping in mind it will improve. It may be hard, but it will get better. I'm going to post this quote from FDR, who was a remarkable president. He led us during the Great Depression. He led us during part of World War II. And he said, if you feel like you're at the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on.
It's great. Mellody, you're a superstar. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your practical advice, and your compassion. Really, I can't thank you enough. And
Thanks.
Everybody can follow Mellody on Instagram at Mellody Hobson. It's 2 L's, Mellody Hobson, and Ariel Investments. I'll post it with the interview. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.